traditional roles out the window. Think about just two people, each in their own worlds, successful in their own right, come together. And I think in that case, you just really need to decide what the division of duties at home is and make sure that for you guys, it's equitable. Welcome, everyone. We have a special guest with us today. This would be the brains of the operation. None other than Andrea Rose Mayo. That's right.
Yes, that is right.
You don't have to do that. You can just talk to me. You don't have to show off. First time on a podcast, she's showing out big time. If you're not watching, she did a little dance for you guys.
Yeah.
That's right. You're yeah, kind of. Well, listen, I think this year we were saying we're going to get away from dad jokes and did you knows.
Yeah.
That being said, I feel really bad for you because you never got to do a dad joke and you have never been on the podcast. So in the spirit of that, just for this one time only, we're going to bring it back for you guys and for Andrea to let her tell a dad joke. So the sad thing is I don't even have to write one down or go look them up. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, but I've got a whole brain full of
Well, you're a dad, so.
Totally. So I've got a whole brain full of dad jokes on deck. But in the spirit of you being the guest, I'll let you go first. What you got for me?
Okay. Why do fathers...
we would lose so bad if we were doing that don't laugh game. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Why do fathers take an extra pair of socks when they go golfing?
I don't know.
In case they get a hole in one.
That's so bad. So you ready for mine?
I am. Oh, gosh.
What did one saggy boob say to the other? You know what? If we don't get some support, people are going to think we're nuts.
Oh, my God.
If this gives you any idea of our two personalities and how we work together, that would be Andrea's worst, dirty dad joke is somebody gets a hole in their sock, and mine's always about boobs and butts. And I think when Rami was on, we talked about taints. I mean, okay.
Yes.
This will give you a whole peek into the dynamics of how it goes at my house. But that being said, I know everyone says this. Every fitness influencer is always a lot of people have been asking me lately. And I'm always shut the fuck up. No one's been asking you anything. That being said, I've had a couple of requests for people, DMs or whatnot. And they're like, hey, why don't you do one on entrepreneurship in marriage or entrepreneurship in kids? And to me, it's kind of one and the same. So by popular demand, we're going to talk about marriage and entrepreneurship. And I think we have a unique perspective on it. We've been married nearly 30 years, 28 years, right?
Yep.
I've been an entrepreneur my entire life. So I met Andrea when I was an entrepreneur. She does not come from an entrepreneurial background.
Nope.
And would be self-admittedly you'd always said look, I'm a doer. Just give it to me and I'll go do it, right?
Yeah. You can tell me, you could be the big chief and I'll be the Indian. I know that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's perfect. What it is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that's important. So I think that probably would be a good segue into our first point, which would be expectations. I think it's really important. So when you're entering a relationship, I'm sure you would agree. I think the most important relationship in your life is going to be your spouse relationship. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you're going to be with this person ideally for the rest of your life, which sounds really scary when I say it that way and very final. Do we really have to be married forever? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, we're going to be with them for the rest of our lives. Yeah. So if that's the case, then I would say that it's going to be the most important decision that you ever make. And so if you do have plans to be an entrepreneur, or let's say you're already an entrepreneur and you meet someone and you're dating, you're like, hey, this is the person, right?
Yep.
I think it would be really important to set the right expectations with that person and probably have a discussion similar to what we're having before you get rolling. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, because you don't want to walk into this and you're totally an entrepreneur, you're doing your own thing, and the other person has no idea what an entrepreneur, what that entails, what the day in the life is of,
Yeah. Yep, 100%. So I think first and foremost, set the right expectations. And for those of you guys listening that are entrepreneurs, I think you take for granted that you run around with a lot of entrepreneurs, you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, but you're in the minority. That's not a normal thing to take. The level of risk tolerance you have to be an entrepreneur is very high.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to spend the rest of your life with someone and they maybe if they don't have entrepreneurship in their family or they haven't been an entrepreneur, it's going to be very hard for them to understand your mentality. And so I think it's very important to set the right expectations and to have conversations around our next point, which is going to be, we're going to give you a couple of scenarios. And we have a couple that's friends of ours, a younger couple, really bright folks. And I've heard them describe this better, I think, than anyone. I really liked their description. So we're going to use that, and we could talk about which one that we are.
Yeah.
But I've seen all these scenarios, and you probably have as well.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about 4 different scenarios. I think 3 work really well, and 1 can be a complete nightmare, right? So the first one would be that you're 2 players in the same game. And what I mean by that is like, there's been times when you've helped me in the business, right?
Yeah.
But not in a situation where it's like, hey, we're like co-CEOs or and again, let's use like American football. So like, okay, I'm the quarterback, you're the running back, that kind of scenario.
Yeah.
That means we're both in the same game. We're both playing for the same win. We understand where we're headed. And that scenario can work, right? And I'm not talking about, in the scenario with Andrea and I, we were in the same game in the sense that like she's got a master's degree in exercise science. She's an athletic trainer, which is like the person that runs on the field when people get hurt. So she obviously has plenty of background to help people in the fitness realm. She's also certified as a trainer. She's trained people forever. She works herself out. She's in great shape. So it was always easy to like, hey, we're short. Can we pull you in for a shift, right? I think that's just been like a nice bonus.
Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about in this scenario. This is like 2 people that own the business and that have these equally heavy hitting roles. Like maybe one person's ops and one person's sales and marketing as an example, right? That scenario can work as long as you guys are very clear, again, going back to expectations, who does what, right?
Yeah.
And whether or not you need boundaries outside of work. Because like your marriage is you have to create enough space in your marriage to have the desire, right? It's like, you start out like you and I, we meet. I thought you were smoking hot. I saw you walking down the sidewalk. It was a blind date. I'm like, okay, this chick's hot. You're wearing like Daisy Dukes and high heels or some shit. I don't remember, but it was pretty awesome. Probably had big hair because it was a long time ago. But there's space between us. We don't know each other yet. And so like there's a desire that says like, man, I want to really get to know you better and get to know everything about you, right?
Yeah.
Well, as you get into your marriage, any of you guys that are married will know this, like a lot of those boundaries come down, and that's a good thing because you love someone, but you still need to have a little bit of desire. So there still needs to be enough space between you to have that draw, I think. And if you're working together in the same business all day, every day, and then you go home and you have dinner together, and then you go out on the weekend, and then of course, what else are you going to talk about? And you talk about the business. It's perfectly fine if you do that. And I think this younger couple that we're thinking about, that's what they do.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's what the expectation is set, and they're both rowing in the same direction. They both like it.
Yeah.
They like to work. They like to talk about work. That's great. But if one of you is like, hey, I don't like to always talk about work, like let's go to dinner and talk about something else, you're going to have to create that space, right? So you can still have that desire, or else the familiarity of like spending all day, every day together, having the same conversations over and over, it's going to be tough. But that is a scenario that will work as long as the expectations are set. Do you agree?
I agree.
And we know plenty of couples that are that way.
Oh, yeah.
Right. That they own a company together, and they both have like, one does finance, one does like sales and marketing. Again, one's people facing, one's back office, whatever that is. And that does work. But I think from what I've seen where it doesn't work is it's just too much familiarity, too much closeness. And there's no right or wrong, by the way. Like any of the scenarios will work, right? Let's start with that. Like, don't let anybody impose like these rules on you that say like, this is the way it should be. It's like, no, bullshit. Like that works for you guys. That's great. And I always hate like, of course, in this world of like speed of information, everybody has an opinion about everything. It's like our friends that we're talking about, like people would look at them and be like, oh, that's terrible. You should never do that. I'm like, says who?
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree.
Yeah. I mean, every scenario will work as long as you choose the right person and you have the right expectations and you guys are on the same page, right? So just leave it at that, because you're going to hear these scenarios and be like, oh, that would be terrible. I'd never want to do that. It's like, well, it works for someone. And guess what? We're not all the same, and that's what makes the world go
I was just about to say that everybody's different.
Yeah.
Everybody's brought up different. Everybody, thinks things should be done differently. And so
And there's no right or wrong.
No.
And I think that's what makes the world interesting. Like, I like different, right? Like, we have plenty of friends that chose not to have kids. And I'm like, I fucking get it. Like, we had kids and it was amazing. Like, if you had kids, it's great. But to say everyone should have kids, like, who says, right?
No.
And our friends that don't have kids, I mean, there's been times when we had kids, I'm like, God, it'd been great not to have kids. And then there's times, right? I mean, come on, right? Do you agree?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, we love our kids,
yeah.
but holy shit, you know? Like, have 2 sick infants at home and tell me, like, kids are the best. It's like, no. But at the same time, like, there's other times when, like, you can't imagine not having kids, right?
Yes.
So it's like, look, man, there's no right or wrong answer. So
No,
let's leave
not.
that there.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 players in the same game. The next one, and this was you and I, and this was described again by the couple that we referenced. And I don't want to use their names because I don't want to like misspeak or like put them under a spotlight that might not be favorable for whatever reason.
Sure.
But quarterback, cheerleader. So if we used American football, it's like, okay, you've got the running back and the quarterback. You have different roles, but you're both in the same game. You're both trying to get down the field and score. Now, the other scenario that you and I were, quarterback, cheerleader, that means somebody's the entrepreneur and they're building the business, right? The other person's more in a support role.
That would be me.
That's right. The other person wears a lot of short skirts, guy or girl. And keep in mind that as well, you guys. I'm not talking about there's traditional male-female roles. I don't care. Like, if you're the female and you're the breadwinner, you're the quarterback. You know, the husband is the cheerleader. Like, have at it. Great. Husband, great. Wife. I don't care. None of that matters. All I'm saying is the roles, traditional or not, someone's out there building a business. Someone's at home supporting that person and doing all the other things in life, right?
Yeah.
That really works well as long as the cheerleader is a cheerleader. And I think that's what you and I have done well.
Yeah.
And that means, and this is how, again, this couple we keep referencing, the best way I heard it described is like the cheerleader would never ask the quarterback to come out of the game when it's like 4th and 15 at the end of the ball game to win, right? Or you're trying to kick the game-winning field goal. And there's times in business that are that way, where you've got a surge and you've got like you're opening a new venture and you're super stressed and you've got to have space and time and freedom to really focus on that if you're chasing it. And in that cheerleader role, it can be thankless at times because you're just supporting a person and that person's dream and everything. And you might not even fully understand it at times. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely. Because we've changed so much since, we were first married.
Yeah.
Things have drastically changed from day one to now.
Yeah.
But we, blocked and tackled or shifted everything.
Yeah, I like that, block and tackle. It's like, right, keeping it with the American football theme.
That's what I thought.
Good job. Yeah. But yeah, it's when you look at the quarterback cheerleader game, that works really well. But and we'll get to the last scenario that maybe doesn't work as well, and then we'll talk about like where you can see some red flags pop up. And this would be again, this all goes back to setting those expectations. So if you hear this and you're like, all right, who am I? It's like, well, when you're getting into a relationship, you really want to have these discussions. Like if somebody wants to stay home with the kids, great. Then the other person's going to have to be solely responsible for driving revenue and paying the bills and doing all those things, right? If the other person doesn't want to let go of a career, great. Then you're going to have to figure out how to balance that out. And I think that will work as well. But quarterback cheerleader will work as long as the cheerleader understands what the entrepreneur is doing. Like that would be like understanding the game of football, and you're never bitching and moaning, when they're trying to score. And in the business scenario, that would mean like, hey man, you're launching a new venture, you got a new business going, and there is times when you have to work your ass off and buckle down. Even tolerant sometimes of just the level of stress and the distraction mentally that it takes. I mean, there's been days when I'm on the couch half the day and I'm literally just thinking, which sounds so dumb, but I'm like catatonic. Like I'll be watching literally a like a Disney show on TV, and Andrea walks into the room and she's like, "What are you watching?" And I don't even know. I'm like, I'm not watching it. Like,
no, because you're
lying
just
there
looking,
staring like I've had a stroke.
Yeah.
And really, I'm just thinking. And any of you entrepreneurs, probably laugh when you hear that. So that scenario will work.
Or you're going like this.
Yeah, exactly. They've got these weird little ticks. Like I do them at the office too. You guys would hate being around me. If I have a zipper on something, I'm thinking I just zip it up and down. Zip, 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 zip. Everybody in their office is like, quit zipping your jacket. It's like, gosh. But again, those are just like ways to pacify myself as my brain runs off into the never, never land. So quarterback cheerleader. The next one would be two players in different games. And this can also work really well. We know plenty of people that are like this, where you've got
definitely.
Like say I'm running the Alloy personal training, franchise, and you are you've got your own career outside of that. And we both are doing our own thing. And then we come together at night and we talk about our days and we share what we're up to. And that can work really well, right? Because then you think, okay, at least you do have that, like each person has that their own like outside of the relationship identity.
Right.
And then you come together and you discuss your days and you kind of like support each other, and that can work really well. Now, I think in that scenario, similar with players in the same game, you got to be really clear about what the expectations are at home.
Yeah.
So let's say that you and I took on a traditional role, right? Which is like, okay, you're going to do the cooking, just basic example, which you do now, but you're in the cheerleader role and you're really good at it and you're happy to do it. And I'm super thankful for it. So awesome. But let's say that you worked a full-time job and you were like a busy executive and you traveled for business and everything. And then I just sat around the house and waited for you to cook me something. And you'd be like, dude, I've been working as much, if not more than
that would not work.
Good to know. You can't expect then traditional roles maybe or even vice versa. I've seen where you've got two busy executives and the guy likes to cook. He does all the cooking and cleaning because maybe he's OCD and he likes a super clean house, and the wife's like, "How about it?"
Yeah.
So again, traditional roles out the window. Think about just two people, again, each in their own worlds, successful in their own right, come together. And I think in that case, you just really need to decide what the division of duties at home is, and make sure that for you guys it's equitable. I mean, I have seen couples where maybe the wife says like, "I like that part of being a wife. Like I like to cook for my husband because I'll have all these great recipes and I love to cook." And of course he loves it because he's like, "Yeah, this is awesome." Right. But that doesn't have to be that way. It's like whatever you guys decide works, but have clear, clean discussions about who's doing what. Right.
Yep.
So those are three scenarios I think work really well. Two players on the same team, quarterback, cheerleader, two players on different teams. Right. There's a fourth scenario that can be really, really toxic. And we've seen this. And this is where you have quarterback, cheerleader scenario, but the cheerleader and or the quarterback are completely toxic.
Yes.
That's not going to work, because if you're in the game, so if you're an entrepreneur and you're out there struggling and trying, and let's say that you came out of corporate America and now you're like, I'm going to launch this entrepreneurial venture, right? And your spouse is used to you coming home, and like when you work for a big company, when you're off work, you're like off work.
Yeah.
You don't care, right? So you're just like, all right, I'm done. And you just shut it down. And then all of your attention is on the other person.
Yeah.
Well, if you get into entrepreneurship, it's not always going to be that way, right? Even if you're there, sometimes you're not there.
Yeah.
Right? You laugh because you've seen that with me. So I think that can be really tricky if the person that's in the support role is not supportive. If they see this as a burden, or there's some unfair, this is not fair, it's not equitable in the relationship because I need more time for me. And you know what? Honestly, this day and age, you see a lot of that. I don't know if it's like a push or whatever. Now, you typically see it around traditional roles where like females are like, listen, I don't want to stay home with kids and I don't want to be the support role. I'll make my own money and all that. And I think all that's great. But I think if you're getting into a relationship with someone and that person is unwittingly getting into the cheerleader role and they have an ego around not being in the cheerleader role, that's going to be a problem.
Yes.
And again, I'm not saying either one's right or wrong. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like, hey, you have to be in these traditional roles, especially based on sex. I'm just saying be really clear and make sure that if you're in that support role and you say okay, that you're really mean okay, because it's a lot. We're going to get into kids next. I'm telling you, when you start adding Rugrats to the mix, it's going to get funky, So that's the one that I've seen be most tricky, where that's where you see marriages kind of grow apart, where the guy feels like he's not supported or appreciated, right? Or the girl, and then they wander off with people from work, right? That can happen.
Yep.
The person at home, same thing. Or they don't feel supported. Now they're, hanging out with a tennis pro, or they're like, how about their personal
plumber?
trainer?
Oh,
the plumber, like that. That's all I've got. You'll leave me for the plumber? That's terrible.
I don't have a personal trainer. I don't need one.
Okay. So plumber it is. I'll know if our kid bends over and his butt crack shows. I'm like, damn it! I knew you slept with the plumber. UPS guy, but he likes to carry packages around the house. I'm like, that little bastard.
Yeah.
I knew it. I knew he wasn't mine. He had a mustache when he came out. Anyway, we get weird. Like,
yes,
sorry, I do this to Andrea. Poor Andrea. So those are the scenarios I think works. Now let's take this. Let's talk about kids. So if we add kids to the mix, I think we take the same scenarios, but now you got to be really clear about your expectations about who does what. You agree?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have two players in the same game, now like someone's got to like wake up in the middle of the night and feed the kid.
Right.
Right. Someone has to take the kid to daycare.
Someone's got to pick them up.
Pick them up. Someone's got to make dinner, right?
Yeah.
Not just for you anymore. You can't just grab takeout and sit in front of the TV, or, hey, let's go out to our favorite restaurant. It's not as easy as it was.
No.
So now you have to decide like who's doing what in the parent role. And a lot of times this one addition to the marriage can cause a ton of animosity. I could distinctly remember, and Andrew still holds this over me. It only happened once, by the way, to my credit, where I was working a ton and I was just trying to get away on the weekends. And I think at the time I was like racing bicycles or something. So I had training for this race and I wanted to get away. And Andrea was like home, and I think we only had one kid at the time.
One,
right?
yeah.
And Andrew was like, hey, I was going to do this. I was going to go like shopping on Sunday with a friend. Can you watch Jake? That was our son at the time, who's now like almost 30. But anyway, at the time, I remember saying no. Like, I'm not going to watch him. Like, hire a babysitter. Like, I'm not going to do it. And in hindsight, like that can't, like, I'm sure the way I presented it was terrible because I'm famous for that. But
yes.
And I know it was terrible because it came up like literally 10 years later. You know how girls can be. Like, Andrea had that thing stored away. She's like, you one time 50 years ago, you once said,
oh yeah,
but it's true. And of course, when I heard it, I was like, yeah, it's not good. So, but I think like you're gonna have your ups and downs like that. Never, no one's perfect. There's gonna be times when it feels inequitable. Like for you, right, as the cheerleader, it's gonna be times it feels inequitable for the entrepreneur. Like, you know, I have to fucking do all this stuff and hold this business together, and I have to like feed the kids this bullshit. But I think, look, that's natural. Like, we have our ebbs and flows, and your energy goes up and down, and maybe you didn't get enough sleep. You're both grouchy. It's like, give each other some grace, right? But also be really clear. I think it goes back to expectations, like who's doing what in this marriage.
right.
So again, quarterback cheerleader, that's how we ended up in this scenario. You loved your career. You were really good at it. You would have kept working, but we had kids, and we looked at each other and it's like, hey, what are we going to do? And you're like, I will stay home. Some people see it as a privilege. Some people see it as a sacrifice. I think it could be kind of both. What do you think?
Well, I agree with that. Although I enjoyed staying home with the kids, and I had a career. I was an athletic trainer. I was pretty good at it. I enjoyed it. Loved working with the high school kids. I really and the coaches. And I even brought my kid with me.
Yeah, early on.
Early on, and did as long as I could. But I knew that I needed just to be home with him. And I think we had another one on the way at the time.
Well, and once you did that, I think that was like, all right, well, now we can just have another one. Right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't such a shock to the system.
But I wouldn't give it up for anything. I really enjoyed staying
Was
home.
it hard, though, transitioning from like adult, like, okay, you have this identity, you're really good at what you do. I mean, I remember like the only reason you were able to bring our kid to work, for anybody listening, was because she was really good at what she did. So they kind of bent the rules, and then the hospital didn't want her to do it. So then the high schools were paying her privately out of like the booster club money. And it was like everybody's clamoring to keep Andrea around. That's credit to who she was and how she worked for these schools and these athletes. But when you had to give that up, especially when Ann came along, did you feel like a loss of like yourself professionally, or were you fully bought into the mom role at that point?
I think I was fully bought into the mom
So you
role.
didn't feel like a sad losing a part of yourself or anything?
And then I was just too busy. You had two.
Yeah, it's hard to be sad when you're busy all the time.
Yeah.
Well, two's not even that bad. I mean, you can and Andrea comes from, she's one of 8.
Yeah.
So, I mean, 2's like nothing.
No,
right?
it's not,
Yeah, no whining.
My mom had 8 kids in like 11 years.
God.
It was crazy.
Very prolific.
Yeah, she was.
I remember when we first got together and your dad was like, well, I hope she's not like her mother. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And your dad's pretty traditional, so he wouldn't say any like saucy things necessarily.
No.
But he was like, well, every time I put my pants at the end of the bed, we had another kid. I was like, oh God, me too. I really hope she's not that way too. Freaking Catholics.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. I wasn't sure, but I think for some people there, prepare yourself. If you're really invested in your career and you're really good at it, especially if you're like, you're in a role that's like you're really needed or what have you, and you say, hey, I'm going to like, one of you could be the guy or the girl. And we know the scenario where the guy's giving up his career, and then the female's the breadwinner.
Yep.
And sometimes it comes down to that, like who's got the biggest earning potential.
Right.
I think it does for a lot of people. It's like, all right, well, if we as a couple decide that we would like to have someone stay home with the kids, the person with the greatest income potential, has to do it. And then you have to decide whether you're willing to do it,
right.
And so like some couples do, some don't. I don't think it's bad either way, but I think that scenario is fine. Just make sure that you both understand the expectations and who's doing what. And I think the last one, again, it's very similar to, two players, same team, two players, different teams, right? Again, you're involved in two businesses. It's just about division of duties and who's going to do what. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. Some people probably like to do some things better than others, whether it's like the kid stuff, cooking, cleaning, picking up, whatever that is. But it can be really lonely, I would say. I remember at one point, it's a long time ago when we had our first gym, and I had somebody working out here, and it was back when travel agencies were a thing. Yeah. And I remember trading sessions with this travel agent because we like to travel, and we'd already been to Alaska and done all these cool trips, even when the kids were little.
Yep.
And we had our second kid, and I was like, well, this is cool. I was working all the time, and I mean, I'd work. That was back when I was in the gym, so I'd go to work at 6 a.m. and I wouldn't get off till like 9 o'clock at night. And I'd come in, read the kids a book, and fall asleep in their beds with them.
Yes, yes.
I would skip pages so that we could hurry up and go to sleep. And the kids would they would remember the books and be like, you didn't read this page. I'm like, that's fucking kids. Anyway, I'd end up sleeping in their beds. But I can remember cashing in these credits for this travel agent. And I don't know if you remember, but I sent you to Canyon Ranch, the fancy spa out in Tucson. Yeah. I was like, fucking husband of the year
I think Anne was not even a year then.
Yeah, so she's like a 9 months old or something.
Yeah, something like that.
My son's like 3, and I send Andrea to Canyon Ranch. And
that was like husband of the year. He did get that.
Yeah, no, I'm still riding on that. I'm still cashing in that.
Yeah,
credit.
that was a good one.
Yeah, thanks. Here we are, 30 years later. But I remember being home, and I hadn't done like the stay-at-home dad thing at all, and it was like 4 days. And by the time you came back, I was like, I was ready to jump off a bridge. I was like, this is the hardest shit I've ever. This is the longest weekend of my life, and I love my kids, but I was like, it was so horrible. Like no adult interaction, right? Little kid stuff all day, diapers and just crying and running around. Our kids were pretty good too, and I was just like, holy smokes! Now I'm
feeding
probably being
them.
What's that?
You had to feed them, and
yeah, exactly. I'm probably overly dramatic about it, but it was very difficult. So it was a good eye opener. It certainly made me appreciate you more. But I think again, just make sure you talk it out with your partner and you decide. And going back to the fact that like there's no right or wrong. I was speaking at a conference. This was last year, and it was a physical therapy conference, and I was sitting on a panel with a pretty famous couple in the industry, in the physical therapy realm, and they were talking about balance. Now, they are in a scenario where it's 2 players, same game. So they're both like executives in their company. And they were talking about how important it is to get away and create space and time. And I think the guys that run the coaching group also coach that quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like you need time. You need to like make sure that you're not always working. And I kind of agree with that. But I also really hate to put labels and constraints on something. Like who's to say what's right or wrong? Nobody. There is no rules. That's the thing. That's what you have to remember. Just because someone else tells you like this is the way you should do it, that do what works for you guys.
Yeah.
Pick a good partner, know how you're wired, decide amongst yourself what's going to work.
Well, and just like you said, there's ebbs and flows, because there's sometimes you're going to be really, really busy and you have to do that work then. And then there's sometimes where it's a little slow, and then you can take a break or enjoy a Sunday or something.
Yeah. Wow, look at that.
Yeah.
Hey, be an entrepreneur. You might have a Sunday that you get to enjoy. Doesn't that sound amazing?
Yeah.
But this guy stood up and he was asking the panel because it came up about like what do you do in your marriage as an entrepreneur? And so one guy stood up and raised his hand and he asked the whole panel, and the couple was he's basically like, listen, I was the one doing all the work. My wife stays home with the kids, and so like I've started taking off like Tuesdays and Thursdays early in the day, and then my wife will go into the clinic and do like the billing and stuff like that, and then I'll stay home with the kids. He's like, and he was almost embarrassed to say it because like it was the whole room was essentially under this assumption that there was a rule that you had to have all this balance in your life, right? And he says like when I'm home, I feel guilty because I'm with my kids, but I feel like I should be at work. And then they're like, oh, well, you need to find this, and the women are like, why don't you try doing some laundry? That'll make you feel less guilty. And there may be some truth to that. But that's assuming he wasn't doing that stuff, right? And I could understand exactly where he was coming from. So then when it got to me to respond, I asked his wife, I said, well, let me hand the microphone to your wife. I'm like, how do you feel when you're at work? She's like, honestly, I feel guilty because I'd rather be home with the kids.
Yeah.
I'm like, then what are you guys doing? Just because someone in this room said that you need a break from the kids and you need to be home from the office hanging out with the kids because your wife needs a break. She doesn't want a break. She loves being home with the kids. You do not. You love your business and your mind is always there. So do what you need to do. And it sounds like you guys just need to have a talk, get out of this mindset that there's rules around this thing, right? And go do you guys.
Yeah.
And I swear you could see the relief on both of their faces. Like, Jesus, finally somebody said it.
Yeah.
Because they thought something was wrong with them.
No.
I'm like, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Nothing wrong at all. It's just about having that open discussion with your partner and deciding who's going to do what. And then just do you. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about what everybody else tells you. There's no rules, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
And I think to your point, Andrea, before, there's seasons of life. And I think no matter which of those scenarios you're in, you got to be really understanding, because we're talking about this through the lens of entrepreneurship. So at least one of the two people in any of the scenarios we mapped out is going to be an entrepreneur, because that's what we're talking about. I can tell you as an entrepreneur, there's ebbs and flows to this thing, right? There's times when you're going to be working really hard. There's times when you're going to have like bunch of time off. There's times when you're going to be mentally distracted. There's times when you're going to be all in. I mean, it's an up and down roller coaster. And like, I've been doing it for a while, so I've been able to manage it pretty well. But I can tell you early on, like, little things can really upset you. I mean, I can imagine, I remember coming home from some days, and these are days when it was like I was like in the weeds in my business. And so things just got me more personally. Over time, I could sort of disassociate my identity from like the happenings in the business. It was like the business was a separate entity. It wasn't me necessarily, right?
Right.
And so I can remember coming home and just like walking straight in, and like, I don't even drink, and I'm like grabbing a couple of beers and just chugging them down, and you're just staring at me and you're like, is everything okay? I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. And then it would give me a minute, and I would tell you, and it would just be some personnel thing that really hurt my feelings or something stupid. But I think brace yourself for seasons of life. If you look at us, when we first got married, I owned one gym, and I worked a lot, and I trained in the gym, and I had this big event, this big staff turnover in 98 where I had all these guys leave. And I mean, that was like it for me. I had like me and a couple other people, and we were training tons of clients. So I had to be in the gym from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. I mean, sleep here at times before you and I met even, right? And then I finally got that dialed in. Then I had a big staff hiccup, and then I had to go back in the gym. So and then from there, it was like, all right, we kind of got that dialed in. You were kind of working part-time in the gym, so we were having a good time there. And then licensing and consulting jumped off, right? And so then it's like, okay, now I'm busy in a different way. Then I started traveling like a madman. I mean, I was on the road like 42 weeks sometimes.
Yeah.
At least one trip.
Yeah.
And so now my kids are really busy. They're in sports. I've got like a teenager and like a preteen at home, and I'm flying to Australia or something.
Yeah.
And that's really hard, right? So we had to go through our adjustment of that, and that wasn't easy, right, at the time, because you were feeling like, wait a minute, I want to go along too. I'm like, well, somebody's got to take care of the kids, and we kind of went through that. I think. But to hear that from me, and to know that it was normal and that we went through it, and in hindsight, we're like, well, duh, of course we felt that way, right?
Yeah.
And we managed it the best we could, came out of it fine, but it was not easy. So I think for the entrepreneur and whoever else is in this relationship, you really need to understand these different seasons. And you need to understand that over time, that to be an entrepreneur, the way I've heard it described that I really like, is it's a self-help journey disguised as a business, right?
Right.
So when you say like, I've changed so much, like my core values are the same, right?
Yep.
I still have the same 12-year-old sense of humor and all those like silly things, right?
Of course.
But I have to be a different person. Like that's and your partner has to understand that. Andrea does a really good job of that. I think, props to you in our relationship, where I'm not the same person that I was. And I mean, you could say that's just life, but I would say, well, not so much as it is like for me to be the CEO of a really fast growing franchise that's going to have 800 locations, that's probably going to sell for like $1 gazillion at some point. I literally cannot be the same person that I was when I owned one gym and I worked in my own business every day.
No,
you can't.
No, you've grown so much.
Yeah, but I think what you've done well and what can be difficult is the other person, even if that other person's working in their own career, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they're not an entrepreneur, they have to be tolerant of the change, because it can feel scary.
Right,
like if all of a sudden I'm traveling all the time, we go through that and you're like, well, what's going on? It's like there's a lot of things that pop up around that. And then like, maybe I'm thinking different, maybe the day in the life of looks a lot different. And for the other person, if you're not secure in the relationship and you don't understand that the person that you're with has to grow to keep this thing moving forward, it can make you feel really insecure. And I've seen that where you're just holding on and you just want this person to be this static thing. But you have to understand as an entrepreneur, if it's like one of our core values, it's like, gosh, what are our core values? I'm drawing a blank, but essentially the description of it's grow or die. And a competitive spirit. And so one of the descriptions of that is grow or die, which means like there's no static, right? You're either moving backwards or you're moving forwards. And so any entrepreneur worth their salt is pushing to grow a business, right?
Right.
And in doing so, you have to literally be a different person. It doesn't mean you change the core values. It doesn't mean you do something different as far as like with your kids or whatever, but you will be a little bit different, and that can be unnerving to the partner. Do you agree?
I do agree. But I think in your change of who you've become, it was necessary for you to get where you are.
Yeah. Well, and that's it.
Yeah.
Well, that's the point ultimately, right? Is like, if you want to grow an enterprise or a business, you can't be the same entrepreneur when you start the business as you will later on. And we've been through a lot of iterations of Alloy and different names. And I mean, you name it, the whole thing, right? And it's just been a wild and crazy journey. But you've been tolerant of the fact that I have to grow, and in some ways good, in some ways probably unnerving and scary, right? And then to maintain our relationship and keep space for desire, still get to know each other really well, right? It's not easy, but we've been able to do it. And again, we're in that one scenario that seems to work for us, and there's several that would. So I would say there's no rules. You guys decide what works for you. Pick the right partner. That's the key. Make sure you're open about it. Make sure that whoever the entrepreneur is understands that they have to grow, and the other person has to be tolerant of those changes, because it will change them a little bit, right? And it can be scary if you're trying to cling on to something that if you think their growth somehow represents growth away from you, that's not true.
Right.
It's just in a different realm, right?
Yep.
And they have to be able to do that. And I think that's it. I couldn't think of anything else around that necessarily. I'm sure there's things I forgot because, marriage and kids is like a forever conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, last thing, I heard somebody say one time, and I think this is true for us, and for those of you guys that are, most of the people listening are probably a bit younger than us. Our kids are grown and gone. We got started pretty early, and so they're grown. One of them's married already, and they're out of the house. But I heard somebody say one time, everybody in their life gets married more than once, sometimes to the same person. Mm-hmm. So I would say, like in these entrepreneurial journeys, like each phase of life you can have the opportunity to either grow apart and just implode, right?
Right.
Or you can retool, get together as a couple, figure out where you are now, and just sort of do it again, right? Yeah. It's almost like starting over. And I think one of those big times for those of you guys that if you haven't been through this yet, when your kids leave for college, you've got the quarterback who's been doing the same thing, and I'm still doing the same thing. Andrea then has been the cheerleader, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, the kids are gone, so there's a lot of free time. And of course, the way I'm wired, I remember looking at Andrea and just saying, like, well, now what are you going to do? Like, you can go back to school, you can start a new business, what are you going to do? And mind you, she's been out of the game for like 20 years at least, right? And so she's like, I was not planning on doing any of that. And I'm like, oh. And it was hard for me to understand that in my, infinite wisdom, like, why would somebody who hasn't been doing it all of a sudden want to do it? And they may want to do it. That could have been, say I was an entrepreneur and you did want to go dive into a new career, and then I lost my support system. Even if it was the little stuff, I'm like, hey, who's making food? Who's doing laundry now? That could have happened, right? And that would have been hard on me. So, each stage, you guys, is going to have its challenges. And I would say that, like, your marriage you're going to reinvent your marriage over and over. So the keys are open communication, understanding what it means to be an entrepreneur, understanding which of those scenarios that you're in. And you may switch from player to QB cheerleader to, players in different games. Those may change. But understand what those are. Mm-hmm. Clearly communicate each time what you're doing and retool. And that's what life's all about, right?
Yep.
Anything
it's been
else?
Good for us.
Yeah, it's worked. It's been good for me. I don't know about you, but it's been okay for me.
No, it's been good. It's just, it's been a long time, but it's been good. I think it's been really good.
Yeah. That's how you build a life. It's like brick by brick, right? You're building a castle. It's not made out of like woo-woo all the time.
No.
You stay together because you go through shit. You have like we've had our parents pass away. It's like you raise kids, you go through these hard times. We had to retool after the kids were gone. Like, who the fuck are we? What are we doing?
Yeah.
We go through that, right? We had to like rekindle. And now we're in a better place than ever.
Yep.
But it takes effort. And it takes two people trying to understand, where the other person's coming from. So I hope this helps you guys. We've had a few requests for it. So I enjoyed it. It was fun and great having you on the podcast finally.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, we'll have you back for Andrea loves to bake, so we'll have her back for like a cookie recipes or something like that. What do you think?
Okay, I know that's down my wheelhouse.
In that case, it'll be really hard, but I'll actually let you have a speaking part on that podcast. Anyway, we'll see you guys later. Peace.